Welcome, everyone. My name is Patricia Houston. I am the acting dean of the Temerty Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, and I'm here to thank you for joining us today for this very important and foundational educational session. Before we begin, I would like to share a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We honor Indigenous people of Turtle Island, including Afro-Indigenous communities, as keepers of these lands and recognize the impact of ongoing colonial projects on their ways of life. We also recognize peoples of African descent who have arrived on Turtle Island through various processes, including the transatlantic slave trade in Canada. So thank you again for joining me this morning. The University of Toronto and Temerty Medicine understands that excellence is achieved through equity. We also understand that there is much that we need to do to improve our understanding and knowledge of how racism is embedded into our current structures and what must be done to begin to dismantle and rebuild these structures within our university and across our health systems. Working together with our hospital partners, we are committed to making the changes to structures and processes to address these issues across the health and social care systems. I would like to now invite Andy Smith, President and CEO of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center and Chair of the TASN CEO table, to share a few words. Andy, thank you very much for your support for today's educational event.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I want to acknowledge just how challenging a time it is across our entire healthcare system. So thank you all for taking the time to come together at this time. The ongoing pandemic has also highlighted gaps in our healthcare system, and these gaps have in fact led to exacerbation of inequities that have existed in our society for centuries. Our TASN organizations collectively have a significant impact on the lives of Black Canadians who work within our walls and who come to our institutions to receive care and education. As a TASN community, we have prioritized addressing issues of racism in our healthcare system with a focus on anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. And although our organizations are at different stages in understanding and in action, I would argue that we are all still very much at the beginning with a long road of learning and action ahead of us. As leaders, we are in positions of power and privilege, and we may not always be mindful of how our actions and privilege impact our colleagues, staff, and patients who experience impacts of racism. Today's session will lay a foundation for learning and deeper understanding of the concepts of privilege and critical allyship that will help us in our roles as leaders across TASN. It now gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Lisa Robinson, Vice Dean, Strategy and Operations at the Temerty Faculty of Medicine and co-chair of TASN's Anti-Racism Steering Committee, to share more and to introduce our facilitators.
Well, thank you, Andy, and good morning, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here this morning with all of you. As Andy said, my name's Lisa Robinson. I'm the Vice Dean of Strategy and Operations for the Temerty Faculty of Medicine. We are incredibly privileged to have with us this morning amazing leaders who have led so much in so many different spaces, and we're honored to have them. I think we all appreciate that in order to disrupt systems of oppression in healthcare, in academic medicine, and in science, it's vital that all of us, each and every one of us who holds power, understands what anti-Blackness looks like in these spaces. As one step toward that, our speakers have generously agreed to lead and to facilitate a 3-part education series, the first session of which is today, and then session number 2 will take place in February, and then the final session in March. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you more formally our 3 speakers, all of whom I find personally incredibly inspiring and whom I learn from every single day. Our first is Dr. Stephanie Nixon. So Dr. Stephanie Nixon is a full professor in the Department of Physical Therapy, cross-appointed at the Rehabilitation Sciences Institute and the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. She's been an activist scholar for over 20 years. Stephanie is co-founder and director of the International Center for Disability and Rehabilitation. Stephanie is a straight, white, middle-class, able-bodied, cisgender settler woman who tries to understand the pervasive effects of privilege. And in particular, she explores how systems of oppression shape health and community care, research and education, and the role of people in positions of unearned advantage in disrupting these harmful patterns. Stephanie developed the coin model of privilege and critical allyship as a way to translate core ideas about anti-oppression and anti-racism to people in positions of unearned advantage. Our second speaker is Dr. Omishore Dryden. Dr. Dryden, a Black, queer, femme, and senior scholar, is the James R. Johnson Chair in Black Canadian Studies, Faculty of Medicine, at Dalhousie, and the co-lead of a new national organization, the Black Health Education Collaborative. Dr. Dryden engages in interdisciplinary scholarship and research that focuses on Black LGBTQI communities, blood donation systems in Canada, and anti-Black racism in healthcare, medical education, and Black health curricular content development. Omishore has published in peer-reviewed journals and book collections and has an edited collection with Dr. Suzanne Lennon, Disrupting Queer Inclusion, Canadian Homo-Nationalisms and the Politics of Belonging, and the co-authored commentary with Dr. Anya Norum, Time to Dismantle Systemic Anti-Black Racism in Medicine in Canada, in the CMAJ in 2021. And finally, Dr. Anya Norum, who's a family physician and a public health and preventive medicine specialist. She's particularly interested in Black community health and wellness and racism as a social determinant of health. Dr. Norum is the Associate Program Director of the Public Health and Preventive Medicine Residency Program at the University of Toronto, the Black Health Theme Lead for Temerity Faculty of Medicine, and the President of the Black Physicians Association of Ontario. And most recently, Dr. Norum has taken the role as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Lead within the Department of Family and Community Medicine here in the Temerity Faculty of Medicine. She's also the host of the podcast Race, Health, and Happiness, where she interviews successful Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, providing wisdom on how to stay well in a racialized world. So again, Drs. Nixon, Dryden, and Norum, we are so grateful to have you here today, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. That was great. We're very happy to be here. So yes, I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm at Dalhousie University. So I just want to acknowledge that I live and work in Chibuktuk, Halifax, the traditional unceded territory of the Maliseet, whose ancestors, along with the Passamaquoddy nations, signed peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1700s. Yet we must not forget that these treaties were signed roughly 140 years before the end of slavery in this region now called Canada. Halifax was imposed upon Chibuktuk in 1749, and it was enslaved African people who were used to dig out the roads and build the city, including much of the citadel. And it was on the southern shore of the Bedford Basin that Mi'kmaq communities shared land with Black people. And this is what allowed Africville to be founded in the 1800s, only as we know to be bulldozed in the middle of the night in the 60s. And so in my acknowledgement, I honor the traditional keepers of the space and land where I work, Mi'kmaq communities, Black people who continue to be here and who are descendants of enslaved Black people, and of course, African Nova Scotian communities. So I'm thrilled to be working with Dr. Norm and our team on the Black Health Education Collaborative, which we just recently launched. And our work really is to look at, to bring together a community of scholars and practitioners who are committed to improving Black health through education and research. So our mission really is to address anti-Black racism and the interlocking systems that impact the health and well-being of Black people and Black communities across this land. And we understand that Black health and Black life is intricately connected to places and spaces in which we work and live our lives. So our work in health, in medicine and medical education and curriculum development really does apply this lens of critical race theory, anti-racism, addressing anti-Black racism, so that we can provide guidance around what we need to unlearn so that we can learn new things, so that we can provide better care to all members of our community, specifically Black folks that we are, the Black folks that live and work here and should have better health outcomes. So I'll end it there and I'll turn it on to Dr. Norm.
Hey. Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful. Unfortunately, I cannot see you all, but I see the numbers and we are grateful. We know that we are in a time, a very difficult time for us as healthcare providers with the pandemic. So it's very much appreciated. I'm not, I think Dr. Omishore-Dryden covered almost all bases. I just wanted to speak a little bit to the context of the Black Health Education Collaborative and bringing it to the Toronto context as far as the history. But I think we should be really proud at University of Toronto in having established, in collaboration with community, our Black Student Application Program, the Black Health Theme Lead position, which I have. And at the time that I was put in the role in 2016, realized that there were no resources nationally, there were no standards, there were no, MCC standards around Black health. And so this work and the establishment of BHEC doesn't just come out of the tragedies that we've seen during the pandemic and after the murder of George Floyd, but in fact, that work was many years in the making of collaborating and working behind the scenes. So I'm really, really excited that we have launched and really delighted to pass the virtual microphone over to Dr. Stephanie Nixon, who I always also worked with for a number of years. And so we intentionally selected her to start this series off to be able to bring the concepts in her COIN model, which touch on anti-oppression concepts and issues around anti-Black racism to launch this series. And then you will hear from Omishore and I more in coming months. So Stephanie, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. It is such a joy to be with you, to be in this important work with you. I want you to settle in where you are. We are going to do something really special together. Some of you are joining live. In fact, over 150 of you are joining live right now. Others will be watching this as a video after the fact. And whenever you're tuning in, that's the right time. So a very warm welcome to all. I want to begin with a question for you, a critical question. So what struck you about the introductions that we just heard? We're 15 minutes in, and there are some themes, there are some patterns that have already come up in the way that these sessions, that this particular webinar has been set up. And I'm inviting you to think critically about what you're noticing about the context that was set. And one of the things that I'm noticing is how much care was given to structuring this session in history, to individuals structuring themselves in history. And I want to do that too. I want to share that I'm from English and Irish ancestry, multiple generations on my mom's side. My dad was first generation Canadian, white settlers. I grew up in Scarborough, and I now raise my own family in the downtown Toronto neighborhood of Parkdale. And what this means is that, except for times when I've been learning and playing in other parts of the world, it means that I have been mostly on Treaty 13 territory. That's where I live, that's where I have gone to school, that's where I have been raised, that's where I have raised my own family. This is land that's stewarded currently by the Mississaugas of Credit. And yet I wasn't aware of this. I didn't have any insight around this until I was well into adulthood. And yet it matters. It matters dearly for my role as a professor, as a scholar, as an educator, as a clinician. It matters dearly. Why? Why might it matter, right? How can we connect the dots? And that's the journey that I've been in, is trying to connect those dots. It's trying to unearth why this matters, how this matters, so that it can inform my action. And so I'm being invited today to share a bit of that journey with you, to make visible some of the lessons that I've been taking myself. And I'm in the journey, and so are you, and that's where I want to start. We're going to invite you to click on a link in the chat box that takes you to a Mentimeter poll. And the Mentimeter poll asks you about where you are at in your journey of understanding privilege and what to do with it and about it. And you have 4 options. Go ahead and vote. It's either this is quite new to me, or I've been thinking about this for a while, but I'm still early in my career, or a little further along. I've been thinking and taking action for quite a while, but I wouldn't consider myself a leader. And then I've seen this participants list. I know many of you in the audience actually have got a long history of active work. I've learned from many of you. I'm learning with many of you. So this final category, the 4th one, I've been in this work a long time and I still have a lot to learn. If you're following the little number in the bottom right-hand side of our screen, we're up to over 100 folks have weighed in. Here's what we're seeing is that we have some folks for whom this is brand new. And if that's you, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We need you here. And at the other end, we have a good number of people who have been in this work a long time. And to honor that that's the case in all the spaces that we're in, sometimes it's the folks holding formal power. Often it's not, right? So just honoring that there is expertise all over the TASM community around understanding privilege, what to do about it. We have many, many of our colleagues and community partners to learn from. And then there's these beautiful big tall bars in the middle, folks who are in the work, right? Who are in the work and continuing to learn. One more question about your journey. This first one was about understanding privilege and what to do with it. How does that apply when we think about anti-Black racism in particular, and not just understanding anti-Black racism, but where are you in your journey of knowing and acting on how to interrupt it in real life? Our same choices. It's brand new. I've been in it for a while, but I'm still early. I've been in it for a long while, but wouldn't consider myself a leader. And the important collection of folks who have been in this particular work for a long while and look forward to further growing. And honoring the kind of humility that we're seeing in the blue bar on the left, the many folks showing up saying, you know what? I may have been paying attention to privilege for a while, but when it comes to anti-Black racism, this is newer for me. And that beautiful yellow bar on the right that tells us we have all kinds of folks with expertise to draw on. And this big, tall, pink bar in the middle. I'm in this journey, but I'm early and I have work to do. Okay, thank you all. A moment as I call up my own slides here. Okay, here we go. So I've been invited in to introduce you to the metaphor of a coin for a very particular reason, a very specific reason, and it's to set the stage. It is to ready us for receiving the incredible learning, the incredible calls to action, the incredible mobilization that are going to happen in the second and third webinar in this series, to set us up to do some learning, but importantly, some unlearning, to ready us to receive the information that Doctors Dryden and Norm are going to be sharing in webinars 2 and 3. And one of the other things that I noticed when I was looking through the quite impressive list of folks in the audience today is that there are many folks whom I've shared a room with before, who I've done this type of coin model work with before. And if that's you, I want to welcome you into this space in a special way to say there are layers and layers and layers of this work. It's wonderful to be exploring what's hitting you differently this time as we do this work together. And as we go forward, these core concepts in anti-oppression, it's absolutely fundamental that we frame from the start that these ideas that I share today, these core concepts in anti-oppression, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, they're not new, and these ideas are not mine. These ideas are not new, and these ideas are not mine. These are ideas that come from a genealogy of Black and Indigenous thinkers for decades and centuries. And any knowledge that I have related to these ideas comes from the generosity and the care taken by the present day carriers of these wisdoms, Black, Indigenous folks, others who have historically been pushed to the margins. And in particular, I want to honor these Black and Indigenous colleagues and friends who have shaped the thinking I'll be sharing with you today, and especially Lana James, who has been instrumental in deepening my understanding of my own whiteness that I'll be talking about. So what you're seeing on the screen, this tiny print, is an October 2020 statement that was released by Tazan following the tragic death of Joyce Etchcon to spell out Tazan's commitments to disrupt racism in healthcare. And I want to draw your attention to a couple of lines in that statement where the Tazan leadership makes explicit that individual actions by healthcare providers are a symptom of systemic racism. We know that anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism towards patients, our colleagues and learners, that it occurs in our institutions, and we're committed to its eradication. So the goal of this first session is to bring a far more nuanced analysis to the kinds of language, the kinds of claims that we see in this Tazan statement, to move from a surface level commitment to a far deeper, more nuanced understanding of what this might mean, because that's what sets the stage for how we might act, how we can resist, how we can disrupt. And so this entire workshop this morning is shaped around a single question. And that question is, what is my work to do on anti-Black racism? Where do I fit into those commitments in the Tazan statement? What is my work to do? And the framework that I'm going to bring to this, this core question, this through line, is based on an article called The Coin Model of Privilege and Critical Allyship. So there's this article in English and French and other resources related to the coin that you're welcome to draw on after this session if you find these ideas helpful. And so now I'm going to put you to work. Whether you are joining right now or watching a recording after the fact, I want you to find something to write with. I want you to find a pen and paper, or if it works better for you, I want you to open up a new screen, or maybe it's notes on your phone, but I want you to set up 3 questions that you are going to be asking yourself as we go forward here. And the 3 questions are, what insights are landing for me? I want you to write this down. Question number 1, what insights are landing for me? This is not one of those workshops where all the learning is going to be at the end. This is one of those workshops that if we're doing it right, you've already had some insights land for you, and it's going to keep happening. The workshop that matters is the one that's going on in your own head and your own body, your own heart. And so this is your gift to yourself, to be collecting your insights as we go. Secondly, we cannot think our way out of oppression. We cannot only do anti-oppression work from the neck up. This is more than an intellectual exercise. And so we're going to start right from the beginning to practice tuning into the embodied nature of doing anti-oppression work with this second question. So how do I feel as I do this learning and unlearning? Often we are tacitly taught in our clinical or research training that if you're having feelings, we need to get rid of them in a hurry to get back to the real work, real intellectual work. That is not the case with anti-oppression work. This is embodied. We need to tune into what's happening in our fields, in our emotions, physically in our body. And so that's what question 2 is about. It's to start practicing how it feels to be doing learning and especially unlearning. And then finally, question number 3, and write this in big letters. This is the most important one. What are my next steps for learning in action? What are my next steps for learning in action? This is the question where we interrupt the idea that I will start taking action later when I know enough. This is the question that interrupts the assumption that education is an end in itself in anti-oppression work, that helps us understand that education is only a means to the end. Let's keep our eye on the prize, which is material change for and with folks who have been pushed to the margins. So what are my next steps for learning in action? Okay, here we go. I'm going to introduce the metaphor of a coin. A metaphor of a coin. This metaphor has 3 parts: the coin itself, the top of the coin, and the bottom of it. And if we've been together before in this work, I want you to do the mental math in your head right now. Remind yourself, what are the components of this metaphor? How does this metaphor work? Beat me to it in your own mind, okay? So what is the coin? The coin represents systems of inequality. These are the big social structures, the big historic structures that shape society. They are historic. These are the big social patterns that were developed before we all got here, that have structured our country, structured our institutions, structured our fields, our professions. We don't get to opt out of these coins. You can't opt out of society. We are in society. The question is how much we can understand and see how these coins operate and what they have to do with each of us. And so how we are structured in history locates us on either the top or the bottom of each of these coins. If we are aligned with the expectations of this coin, with the system of domination, then we get a benefit that others don't. We did not earn it. We did nothing to get it. We have it because of who we happen to be, the color of skin we happen to have, whom we happen to love. And the opposite is also true. If how we're structured in history is that we are aligned with the bottom of the coin, it means that we have a disadvantage that others don't. We did nothing to earn it. We get this disadvantage because of who we happen to be, how we happen to be structured in history. We find ourselves on the top or bottom of coins. And what do I call the top of this coin? Privilege. And in this framework, I call the bottom of this coin oppression. Privilege, unearned advantage, oppression, unearned disadvantage, based on how we're structured in history by systems of inequality. And there's not just one coin for all systems of inequality. There are many, many different coins, including the ones showing on the slide here, and more. And they'll matter differently depending on time and place and context. And these coins matter dearly for those of us in healthcare, for those of us in TASM, because these forces, they shape who's healthy, who's ill, the kind of care people get. These coins shape and often determine who lives and who dies. These are the avoidable health inequities that have been laid so bare during the pandemic. And it's not just health, is it? These systems of inequality shape all the institutions in society. So it's also education. Think back to the classrooms that you teach, the classes you were in as you were coming up through your careers in healthcare. Who was overrepresented in those classes? Who was underrepresented? And it shapes professional advancement. When we look at our own institutions, as we move up the ladder of power, who's overrepresented, who's underrepresented. And it's not just these institutions, is it? It also vastly shapes our different experiences with policing, the justice system, the prison industrial complex. And so let's connect these coins more directly to equity. So much of this work is framed for us in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, or justice work. And so let's get specific. Let's connect it to equity, to the relationship between the outcomes for folks who find themselves on the top of a coin and folks who find themselves on the bottom. And we're going to do an exercise here, a mental exercise. I'm going to call your attention to the bottom of this coin, and I want you to answer this question for me in your own head. And again, this is also for those of you who are watching this as a recording. Do this work with us as we go. What are the common terms that we have in public health policy, in our classrooms, in our clinical work, in our activism? What are the common terms that we have for groups of people whose outcomes are worse because they find themselves on the bottom of the coin? So what are the general terms that we have for the folks, the groups of people whose outcomes are worse because they find themselves on the bottom of a coin? That's how they're structured in history. See if you can call up one or two or three of these terms. Yeah, that's it. It's terms like marginalized, right? Disadvantaged communities, high-risk groups, at-risk groups, vulnerable populations, key populations, priority neighborhoods, priority communities, hard to reach, hard to serve. And on the list goes. And now let's put our minds to the top of this coin. What are the matching terms that we have, the general terms that we have in common usage in all of our education and research and policy and clinical work to describe the groups of people whose outcomes are better because of the unearned advantage they receive by virtue of how they're structured in history, by virtue of finding themselves on the top of a coin? What are the common terms we have? And if you're struggling to think of any, then I'm with you. And I would propose that it's not easy. We don't have such an easy nomenclature, such an easy vocabulary to describe the top of the coin. And in fact, even trying to come up with language that's matching the bottom of the coin is challenging, right? And clunky. Unfairly advantaged communities, free lift populations, lucky groups, right? We just don't have a framework, a vocabulary for the top of the coin. We don't have a way to talk about and therefore to think about this position on the top of the coin. And I'll take it a step further and propose that my experience has been that when we deal with equity, when we deal with EDI, when we deal with justice, and when we deal with anti-racism, frequently what happens is we don't just disappear the top of the coin. We disappear the coin itself. And what ends up happening is that our equity work gets framed as exclusively the terrain of the bottom of the coin. Why is this so harmful? Why does this send us backwards? Why is this a form of performance such that with the best of intentions, we are pouring resources, personal resources, labor, emotion, and financial material resources into EDI work that is framed as focused exclusively on folks on the bottom of the coin? Why does it actually re-entrench inequity as opposed to upend it? What are the implications for equity if we frame it exclusively as the bottom of the coin? Do this work in your head, because if we can get this, it changes everything in terms of possibilities for transformative action. So another quiet moment, answer this question in your own head. What are the implications for equity if we frame it exclusively as the bottom of the coin? Why does this send us backwards instead of forwards? Yes, I am receiving a wave of thoughtful answers here. Yes, let me organize this into two ways of responding to this question. The first is what we frame as the problem instantly sets the universe of possible solutions that can follow. What we frame as the problem in the first place instantly sets the universe of possible solutions that can follow. So if we only frame the problem as the bottom of the coin, it limits the thinkable solutions that we can come up with for responding to equity. It takes off the table the problem of the coin and the problem of the top of the coin. And secondly, how does framing equity as only the bottom of the coin, how does disappearing that there is a coin or a top of the coin, how does it allow people like me, who find herself on the top of most coins, how does it allow me to see myself in my equity, diversity, and inclusion work, in my anti-racist action, in my justice work? How does it allow me to be framed in this work? How does it allow me to see my motivations? How does it allow others to see my motivations in this work? It allows me to not even be on the page, to not even be part of the system of inequality. It allows me to show up and understand my relationship to my EDI work, to my anti-racist action, as coming from a place of neutrality, as being unconnected, which is nonsense, right? There's no opting out of these coins. I am on the top of this coin. The question is, do I see it or not? Can I come to understand it or not? I'm not neutral. There's no such thing as neutral. When we're on the top of these coins, we are reproducing them until we are not. There is no such thing as neutral. When we are on the top of these coins, we are designed, we are socialized to remain oblivious to that position in order to reproduce these systems of inequality until we interrupt that oblivion and act to interrupt our complicity. To interrupt the idea that on the top of a coin, I'm deeply invested in justice work from a place of altruism. For others to see my motivation in this work on the top of the coin as generous, or at worst courageous, for me to receive awards for my work in justice, given my position on the top of the coin without even being aware of it, when really what am I? I am part of these systems of inequality. I hold the positions of power and success in society in part because of the very unearned disadvantage of the folks on the bottom of these coins. It's on their backs that I've received the unearned advantages that I have. And once I can see that, it changes everything. It shifts the possibilities for action from doing for, from me being some expert showing up to help those poor folks on the bottom of the coin, to understanding that the problem's not the bottom of the coin. The problem is the coin. The problems are these systems of inequality, and they're not just bad for folks on the bottom, they're bad for folks on the top as well. They limit our humanity. They limit the contributions and talents of folks on the bottom of the coin. The problem is the coin, and we need to be working across the coin in solidarity to dismantle that problem. And once I can come to see my position on the top of coins, that world of possibility for action opens up to me. go to your questions and take a moment to give yourself the gift of reflecting on where you're at right now. You don't need to answer all three of these questions. Go to the place that resonates with you and take a few quiet moments. Whether you're doing this in the room with us now or in the recording, take a moment to jot down what is landing for you, how you're feeling, what opportunities for action have just come to light for you. A few quiet moments. People who work in healthcare have a finely tuned capacity for multitasking. So I'm going to move us forward with a few more ideas here. But if where your head and heart is to stay writing in your questions, you go ahead and stay there. Okay. I've been speaking at a fairly lofty level, theoretically, about these coins. Let's get a little more specific. Let's talk about some specific coins and how they operate. And I want to begin with a coin called heterosexism. And I want to name that this language may be familiar and friendly to a lot of folks. You're like, oh, good, I'm glad we're talking about heterosexism, heteronormativity. For others, it may be that this language doesn't fit for you. It feels elite and I really welcome you to engage with the language here, however helpful. But if it's not helpful for you, to not be held up by it. What matters far more are the ideas behind these words. So, the coin of heterosexism. Let's begin with the concept of heterosexual. So, people who are heterosexual, and that's me, I identify as heterosexual, meaning loving or being romantically attracted to someone of the opposite sex, assuming a gender binary. So, being straight, being heterosexual, nothing wrong with it. But then there's this coin, heterosexism. This big social structure, this historic pattern that has structured society and its institutions that was here before we got here, that views being heterosexual as the only right way to be, as the default norm. And so because I find myself on the top of this coin, I happen to align with the expectations of this coin, it means that I get an unearned advantage. And it's taken me a long time to come to see it. There are many ways I still don't understand how I receive this unearned advantage. But some of them that I've come to be able to recognize are that I get to walk through my days or down the street showing affection to my partner without risk of ridicule or, at worst, violence. I get to see my way of being valorized, taken as the default norm in popular culture, in books and movies. I get to see my way of being enshrined in law and policy. And folks who find themselves on the bottom of this coin, who are not straight, don't always enjoy those same benefits. And granted, we're seeing changes, right? Like, of course, there's popular culture that is foregrounding and celebrating folks who are not straight. Of course, there are changes to policies and law to be more inclusive, and those are important signs of progress. But that's not evidence that this coin has disappeared. Right? These systems of inequality will continue to reassert themselves in new ways. We need to be vigilant to the ways that they constantly are reasserting themselves in order to keep interrupting. And this is a good time for us to tune into a key question. Am I suggesting that this is about good and bad people? Am I saying that people on the top of a coin are bad and that people on the bottom of a coin are good? Is that what this metaphor is trying to translate to us, the metaphor of the coin, that people on the top are bad? Just do that in your head for a minute. What is the logic of this coin? What does finding yourself on the top of a coin mean? It means that that is how you are structured in history. We find ourselves on the top. I'm not saying folks on the top of the coin are bad. I'm saying folks on the top of the coin receive unearned advantage, and that is unjust. This doesn't mean folks on the top of the coin are innocent, right? Folks on the bottom of the coin have been giving those of us on the top of coins feedback for decades and centuries about this. And we have been very slow or unwilling to listen. So we're not innocent. But neither am I saying that finding yourself on the top of the coin is a position of badness. So when, not if, but when I get the feedback of, Stephanie, you receive straight privilege in society. Stephanie, you benefit from a heteronormativity in your field, in your institution. It's not an attack on my character. It is not an attack on my character. It's a statement of fact about how power operates in society. And when I find myself on the top of a coin, if I'm serious about anti-racism, if I'm serious about my commitments to EDI, then I need all the feedback I can get about my complicity in these systems, about how they work. And so when I receive feedback about my straight privilege, it is a gift. It is a gift, and I'll do my best to receive it. Because who's more expert on how heteronormativity plays out in society, right? It's not folks on the top of the coin, it's folks on the bottom. And so if someone trusts me enough to give me that feedback, even if they give it to me with an angry voice, it's feedback I need. It is not an attack on my character. It's a gift. Let's walk through another coin together. This is the coin of ableism, the big set of ideas that is so powerfully enshrined, has structured the way our society is set up, our institutions, our fields. And if we are aligned with this coin, we find ourselves on top. It's a set of ideas. I wear glasses, but I still get to be viewed as able-bodied. I can walk up 3 flights of stairs, but not 300, but I still get to be top of this coin. Why? Because it's not a concrete thing. It's a set of ideas that can be imagined otherwise. And so am I saying that able-bodied people are bad? No, I'm not. I'm saying able-bodied people receive unearned advantage because of how our society is set up in ways that serve able-bodied folks, first and foremost. But we need, if we're serious about EDI, if we're serious about doing our anti-Black racism work in a way that doesn't reproduce ableism, that understands the intersections of ableism and anti-Black racism, then we need to understand how this plays out in society and who's more expert. It's folks on the bottom of the coin, isn't it? And yet who typically holds the power and the resources? Who typically to decide how our classrooms, how accessible our classrooms will be, our websites, our clinics, our Zoom sessions? Who holds the power? Who holds the pen to write policy? Who holds the resources to decide how money will be allocated? It's typically folks on the top of this coin. And so you can see the disconnect. You can see the problem we've got and why this coin keeps reproducing itself. And what's this coin? What is this coin that is about the match between sex assigned at birth and the gender one feels inside? This is the coin of cisgenderism, cisnormativity. This is me being handed to my parents as a babe and the healthcare provider saying it's a girl, and me growing up feeling girl inside. I find myself on the top of this coin. Who is more expert on how this plays out in society? It's of course folks on the bottom of the coin. In fact, at least in the last 2 coins, we've heard of the position on the top of the coin. With cisnormativity, frequently the language of cis, C-I-S, being cisgender, is a term that folks haven't even heard of before. It's a term I hadn't even heard of before, maybe till what, 5 years ago? That it's just a different way of being in society, cis or trans. And yet instead of being taken as just a different way of being in society, this coin is so powerful that it positions the top of the coin as being beyond naming, as just the norm, as just the right way to be in society, against which there is only difference. So how do these coins do it? Because if we can understand how these systems of inequality operate to give unearned advantage and disadvantage, then those are the sites for resistance. Those are the sites for action. So I'm going to offer 3 interrelated levels by which these coins work to exclude or give unearned advantage. And the first is institutional. Institutional. All the laws, the policies, the culture in our institutions. And I'm talking about institutions like our specific institutions, our specific hospital, our specific department at the university, and also institutions broadly like education, healthcare, law enforcement. So institutionally. And then interpersonally. This is how we talk to and treat each other. Sometimes in EDI work, this is where we'll talk about microaggressions and how to interrupt them. Many calling into question the language of micro, saying there's nothing micro about these aggressions. And this is a good point to remind ourselves that interpersonally, we are the agents who populate the institutions, right? The way these institutionally these coins play out, it's not immutable. We are the agents who populate these institutions. So it's our actions that happen at the interpersonal level that can shift and change what's happening institutionally. And what is the third level? What is the third level? It's internally. It is the embodied work. It is the more nuanced analysis that we need to do in order to move forward in our journey of anti-oppression. Because when we find ourselves on the top of a coin, we've been socialized since the beginning to view ourselves as superior. And that doesn't sound good, does it? You may be having a feeling like, oh, I don't do that. And I wish I didn't do that, but I do that every day. And here's how. It's because I have been socialized for the coins where I find myself on top. I have been socialized to view myself and my way of being in the world as normal, as the default, as the norm, as opposed to just one way of being. And that is an internalized superiority that I need to unlearn. And the same happens on the bottom of the coin. Coins where I find myself on the bottom, I have been socialized from the beginning to have an internalized sense of inferiority. And that also needs to be unlearned. And so each of these many coins, the logic of unearned advantage and disadvantage holds, but the specific logics of oppression and how each of these coins play out is often quite nuanced, needs a deep dive. And I want to draw attention just for a moment to the coin related to language in Canada, and to honor that in Canada, if we are English speaking, there's an unearned advantage that's enshrined in policy and law in how resources are distributed. That's different than folks who are French speaking. But that's not the end of the story when it comes to language in Canada, is it? Because English and French are both settler languages, and both of these settler languages are given advantage institutionally, interpersonally, internally, over all other languages, including Indigenous language. And that walks us to the coin of settler colonialism, the big social structure on which this nation is founded, that has shaped, influenced, driven our fields, our institutions, that gives unearned advantage to folks who are not Indigenous. An unearned disadvantage, harmful disadvantage that we see playing out all the time in healthcare and beyond to folks who are Indigenous. And hopefully you're looking at this slide, or if you're not able to see the screen right now, you're thinking, okay, settler colonialism, a coin with Indigenous folks on the bottom, settlers or folks who are not Indigenous on the top, that's a bit simplistic. Isn't that an oversimplification? And you're right, let's complexify what's happening here, because the top of the coin, folks who find themselves on the top of this coin, this is not a homogeneous group. It's an incredibly diverse group. My experience as someone of English and Irish ancestry is deeply different than my partner, for instance, who was born in Manila. But neither is the bottom of the coin a homogeneous group. And one of the common ways that those of us on the top of this coin reproduce the coin regularly is through pan-indigenizing, as opposed to understanding that there are folks in this nation state called Canada who are Métis, who are vastly different culturally, historically than folks who are Inuit, who are vastly different culturally, historically than folks who are First Nations. And that there are over 600 First Nations and over 50 languages, right? Incredible diversity. And let's complexify this in one more way. And that's drawing on the idea gifted to us from Chelsea Vowell, the Métis scholar, lawyer, writer, activist, of stolen people on stolen land. Thinking of the relationship between folks who are Black and Indigenous. Right? Colonialism teaches us to put people into boxes. And yet we have many people in our midst who are Black and Indigenous. And all of this walks us to the coin of racism, And what I want to do here is to tell you a story. We've been going for a while. So again, if you're doing this live or if you're doing this in the recording, stretch, do what it is that your body wants to do right now to allow you to receive this story well. Take a deep breath. This is a true story. And I know it's true because it's my story. And it goes like this. I found out that I was white when I was 28 years old. So I personally found out I was white when I was 28. And here's what was happening for 28-year-old me. I had graduated as a physiotherapist. I've been working for 5 years in the big, beautiful Wellesley Hospital. Many of you will remember. It's a big activist hospital. And I was working with the HIV team there and was having my second education outside of my academic training from the HIV community, right? An education in activism. And I'd grown up in a left-leaning household, and I considered myself pretty embedded in social justice work. And I'd gone back to school for a master's degree. And I was in a public health class, and the teacher, the prof, asked us to reflect on the social forces that had shaped our own health. And as I listened to my classmates going around the room, I heard answers such as, I grew up poor, and that shaped my health. I am an immigrant from South Asia, and that shaped my health. I'm Black, and that shaped my health. And to be clear, this was the one Black classmate that I had in my master's and PhD program, the only one. And thank goodness I was in the class with those thoughtful students that day, because I learned something so important. Because as it was rolling around to my turn, I was having that uncomfortable feeling that I didn't have anything useful to offer. And when it got to me, here's what I said. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not anything. I'm just normal. I'm not anything, I'm just normal. But of course, I wasn't just normal, right? I was middle class. I was from English and Irish ancestry. I was white, I am one. And so how was it possible for me to view my whiteness as not anything? As just normal? How was that possible? And what I've been able to understand in hindsight is that it required an incredible misunderstanding of what racism is and how it operates. And that it wasn't an accident that I misunderstood racism. That I had been socialized to understand racism as something that is only interpersonal, that is not structural, that is only interpersonal. As racism as something that is only something bad people do. And as only something that is done intentionally. And just tune in to your own understanding of how racism operates, because this might be a moment for unlearning, right? For distancing ourselves from those faulty assumptions. Because what I can see now is that to see my whiteness as not anything, as just normal, what it actually required was a profound position of superiority, such that my whiteness was just taken as the norm. I was able to see myself as nothing beyond naming, just like cis, CIS, off the table, that top of coin position. So it was with my whiteness, off the table. I wasn't a bad person. I'm not doing anything racist intentionally, so it had nothing to do with me. There is no top of the coin. So long live the coin. And so what's this called? When whiteness is taken as the default norm, the benchmark standard against which everything else is judged, against which everyone else is encouraged to assimilate. What's that called? It's called white supremacy. And I'm not talking here about white supremacists. I'm not talking here about individuals intentionally trying to advance whiteness as a power structure. I'm talking about white supremacy, the social, political system that was designed by people whose skin looks like mine centuries ago, and now has shaped society, our institutions. We now know the Human Genome Project has confirmed what many already knew, that neither whiteness nor blackness are valid scientific constructs, that they've always been and they remain social. That whiteness is a social idea, blackness is a social idea based on different colors of skin and textures of hair. And so a slightly deeper dive on white supremacy. It's not about some DNA, it's about a political, economic, and cultural system in which folks who have skin that looks like mine overwhelmingly control power and material resources, where conscious and unconscious ideas, especially in healthcare, right? Everyone's here with good intention. Everyone's here with good intentions. And yet unconscious ideas of white superiority and entitlement are widespread, and the relations of dominance and non-white subordination are reenacted every single day in our classrooms, our clinics, our labs. In many cases, without those of us on the top of the coin even realizing it. All those of us on the bottom of these coins probably see it clear as well. And so to deepen this understanding, it is crucial to get our heads around the idea that race didn't come first, that racism did, that there have always been people with different colors of skin or textures of hair, but this was not viewed in terms of superiority or inferiority until people who have skin that looks like mine, hair that looks like mine, invented the idea of race. Why? Why was the idea of race invented? Because it was the method by which Europeans operationalized the quest for economic growth and power through the European colonial conquest and the transatlantic slave trade, and created what is now a global myth of superiority and inferiority in order to justify the dehumanization and exploitation of people with darker skin. So history matters. How we are structured in history matters. Racism isn't only something between individuals, something that only bad people do on purpose. It is a coin, a historic social structure that gives unearned power and access to resources at a global, regional, local, and personal level to people who are deemed to be white or have proximity to whiteness, and denies, limits, or obstructs access to power and economic opportunities for people who are not deemed to be white. And let's return to the fundamental question, is this about good or bad people? Am I saying that people on the top of this coin are bad? Am I saying that white people are bad? I'm not, am I? I'm saying that people who find themselves on the top of the coin of racism, people like me, we are structured in history in such a way that we receive unearned advantage, and that we may not be bad, but neither are we innocent. We are reproducing this coin until we are not. And so when I get feedback, not if, but when I get feedback, because I'm in the weeds with anti-racism work. So I'm going to make missteps, right? When we're engaged in anti-oppression work, there are going to be missteps when you're on the top of the coin. And we rely on the feedback to see it. So when I get the feedback, Stephanie, what you just did was racist. Stephanie, what you just said was racist. Even if the feedback is given with an angry voice, it's not an attack on my character. It's a statement of fact about how this system of inequality operates in society. And if I'm serious as a white person about anti-racist action, if I'm in it authentically, in more than just in words, then this is feedback that I dearly need. And I will get the flood of emotions every time. I still do. You're socialized. This is the embodied nature. I will still get the flood of shame, of guilt, of denial, of outrage, of embarrassment, of paralysis. This is fragility. We've been socialized to respond that way on the top of a coin when we're given feedback about our complicity. Why? In order to shut down any possibility for progress. Right? That is the function of fragility, to shut down any possibility of progress. To teach the person on the bottom of the coin who just gave us this feedback that you cannot trust me enough to give me this feedback again. I can't. I'm only an ally in name, right? So I will try to manage that flood of emotions that I have every time, and I will receive that feedback as a gift. White supremacy is insidious. It operates in so many ways. It will continue to reassert itself. One of the ways that it operates is on the bottom of this coin, whereby a gradient of advantage and disadvantage is created according to proximity to whiteness, and whereby the category created, invented at the bottom of this gradient is blackness, giving rise to the unique coin of anti-Black racism, which is global and local, of which we are all. So how does this coin operate? To exclude, to harm, to cause violence in clinics, labs, classrooms. This is where we'll have a deep dive from Drs. Norum and Dryden in webinars 2 and 3 in this series. But for now, stay with me as we round out our understanding of the core concepts to ready ourselves for the next sessions. Okay, let's pull together some ideas. Let's pull together some of these concepts first. Can people be on the privilege side of some coins and the oppression side of other coins at the same time? Yes, of course, right? That's all of us. That is all of us. That's our patients. Those are our learners. It's all of us. This is the notion of intersectionality brought forward by Black scholars, Kimberly Crenshaw, advanced by Patricia Hill Collins, that reminds us that we can't pay attention to just one plane of domination and oppression. We need to understand how they intersect. They don't intersect in a mathematical way. I'm on the top of 2 coins and the bottom of others, so I'm canceled out and I'm neutral. No. It's that our positions on the top and bottom of coins create complex arrangements of advantage and disadvantage that play out differently, depending on time and space and place. And that these locations, especially related to whiteness, are more than theoretical. Quoting Coates, all of the phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organ, cracks bones, breaks teeth, you must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, charts, regressions, all land with great violence upon the body. And they land on different bodies. So what do we do? What do we do? And we're back to our core question. Yes, what is my work to do on anti-Black racism? And the answer is it depends. It depends on where one finds oneself, on the top or bottom of a coin, that different actions are needed. That if you find yourself on the bottom of a coin that you want to dismantle, well, those are the communities that have been leading these movements for all time. That's where the expertise, the energy, and the burden of this work rests. That's where I do my learning from folks on the bottom of the coin. This workshop is to invite all of us to tune into our positions on the top of coins. So for any of us who are not Black, to tune into our position on the top of the coin of anti-Black racism. And for any of us to also tune into the other positions we may hold on the top of a coin, our straightness if we want to disrupt heteronormativity, our maleness, we want to disrupt sexism, our able-bodiedness, we want to interrupt ableism, and how all of these coins intersect with racism. So this reorientation for those of us on the top of the coin, I happen to call it practicing critical allyship. But these are just words. What matters far more are the ideas behind it. And others bring different language to the table. Great anti-oppression leader, Black Canadian Rania El-Mugamar talks about radical solidarity. Black, queer, African-American writer Mia Mackenzie talks about currently acting in solidarity with. What's more important are the ideas behind these words. The Anti-Oppression Network describes this as an active, consistent, and arduous, difficult practice. Not a moment, not an identity, not a set of tasks, not a checklist, not some work to start and finish and get done, but a practice, a lifelong practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person in the top of the coin seeks to operate in solidarity with folks on the bottom of the coin, not how we have been taught. How have we been taught to do this work when you're on the top of a coin? We've been taught that the right orientation is one of saving, fixing, or helping folks on the bottom of the coin. And you see how that sends us backwards? Folks on the bottom of the coin don't need our help. It's folks on the top of the coin that need help, who come to see our complicity and interrupt, follow the lead of the movement leaders from the bottom of the coin. And so how do we access this new orientation? Well, understanding our position on the top of coins is what makes it possible. Because when we don't, when privilege is unchecked, it leads to an irrational, a nonsensical sense of neutrality, right? I'm doing this work in EDI from a position of privilege because it's terrible. That's terrible that's happening to those folks. No, there's no neutral. It's because I am complicit. I'm coming from a place of accountability, of responsibility because of how I find myself structured in this. And it helps me call into question the internalized sense of expertise and entitlement that I've been socialized to have, to interrupt that. So what is the role then for folks on the top of the coin in working with solidarity, in solidarity with folks on the bottom of the coin to deal with the problem, which is these intersecting systems of inequality? Well, there are two very important features of finding ourselves on the top of the coin, and they are power and safety. Power, and frequently it's formal power. Many of us in the room today hold extraordinary formal power, but it is always informal power as well. We are given the benefit of the doubt. We are assumed to know what we're talking about. We have the power to put things on the agenda, to say things out loud, and to be able to do it with a kind of safety that folks on the bottom of the coin do not have. hopefully at the very beginning of this talk, when I was introducing that these ideas are not mine and they're not new, a thought went through your head of, well, what is she doing here then? If I'm trying to explain that we need to debunk the idea of the white expert in anti-oppression, then why is it me giving this talk? Because I am working in solidarity with my partners on the bottom of the coin to leverage, to deploy the power and safety I find myself having because of the body I'm in, because of how I'm structured in history, to be able to talk about whiteness and white supremacy from this body with a kind of safety that many folks on the bottom of the coin of racism simply could not. So I'm translating ideas I have learned. Meanwhile, it's folks on the bottom of the coins who hold a kind of embodied expertise that those of us on the top will never have, but also have experiences of oppression and risk of reprisal, right? What happens when folks on the bottom of the coin try to give feedback to folks on the top about how these coins operate? Frequently, we don't receive it well. And then there's the minority tax. To be clear, these coins were created by folks on the top of the coin, and yet the burden of dismantling them falls frequently to folks on the bottom. So the coins where we are on top, it is time for us to show up. It is time for us to deploy our power and safety, to work in solidarity with movement partners on the bottom, accountably, working together across the coin. How, where, what kinds of actions? At all of these sites, institutionally, interpersonally, internally, all of them, because they are interconnected. And we will have different work to do depending on what sides of the coins we find ourselves. So, some takeaway messages. What is this reorientation that anti-oppression is calling us to? It is a move away from how we have been socialized to understand our role when we're on the top of a coin. And this is me, the first 20 years of my career, that I use my expertise to help marginalized populations deal with inequities. We can see now how problematic that orientation is. And rather, to move towards these commitments, I'm going to show you 3 on this slide and 2 more on the next. It's these commitments we want to move towards. I see and understand my own role in upholding systems of oppression that create inequities. I learn from the expertise of, I give credit to, and I work in solidarity with folks on the bottom of the coin to help me. And that my work when I'm on the top of the coin includes mobilizing action among others on the top of that same coin, because they will hear things out of my body differently than folks on the bottom. I understand that effective anti-racist action requires that I name, interrupt, and uproot white supremacy and ongoing colonial patterns. That's our work. And further, that this logic extends to EDI work broadly. And here's the big caution, which must resist the norm right across the field of EDI of diversifying within whiteness, right? Of never naming whiteness, of doing great justice work on other coins without ever naming the role of white supremacy, and must move instead, all aspects of EDI work must move instead to uprooting whiteness as a power structure that intersects so insidiously with other coins. And all of this is in the spirit of mobilizing in collective action. That's why it's so magical that we have well over 100 folks in the room right now, 100 leaders. This is about mobilizing in collective action under the leadership of the movement leaders who are on the bottom of the coin, not just anyone on the bottom of the coin. The movement leaders, the folks with specific critical expertise in dismantling these systems of inequality. That's the way forward. And so how do these more nuanced understandings help us come to see and understand the commitments in the October 2020 TASN statement differently? How does it help us understand what we said here, possibly in new ways? One of them is to resist the idea that racism is about bad apples in our institution. Sure, there are bad apples, but structural racism is about all of us. It is about me and how I reproduce it every day, and the vigilance of the practice of coming to reevaluate and unlearn and interrupt my own role. It's recognizing that white supremacy will continue to reassert itself in new ways, to the point where we may even want to question the idea of, is this something that we can eradicate? And rather is our commitment instead to continued vigilance, to continued practice of spotting, of seeing the way that white supremacy is reasserting itself and interrupting it at every turn. And that the way we do this work is by seeking the expertise from movement leaders. Because as I've learned from Rania El-Mugamar many times, just because we're new to the struggle doesn't mean that the struggle is new. Something that we regularly do on the top of the coin is once we realize there's a coin, we race to build our solutions for it, thus wreaking more havoc. Right? Where's the expertise? Where are the movement leaders? How can we grow trust and alignment with them to help us dismantle our own complicity in these structures? And that finally, this is about history. If we're serious about anti-racist action in our institutions, then it's about excavating our complicity. It's about being willing to shine a bright light on our histories of creating and reproducing anti-Black racism and other coins. It's about being accountable and then doing the repair work, making amends in order to grow trust and imagine a different future. Go back to your questions and give yourself the gift of new insights that are landing for you. What do you want to remember later? How does this feel? And what new steps for learning in action have just been made possible for you? A few quiet moments to collect these thoughts. Then we're going to close with some Mentimeter questions. So first, some quiet moments for you to attend to these written questions. Can we have the Menti link back in the chat box, please? We're going to invite folks, when you're ready, have a look at the Mentimeter poll. And we're going to move to the next question in Menti. And this next question is, I unlearned something today. Yes, no, or unsure. I unlearned. I realized there is something that I took as given that I can now see differently. Tuning into this idea of unlearning, because that's not something we're typically invited to put our minds to, is it? What does this feel like? And frequently for me, it doesn't feel good. Frequently for me, it feels very unsettling. I often have a physical response. I often feel a little queasy when I'm unlearning something. So tuning in, because when we are unlearning, we are doing good work. Thank you. And for those who are unsure, honoring that, yeah, great, still trying to figure this out. Okay, on to our next poll. How do you feel? And you get to pick as many of these as you want. How do you feel as we do this work of learning and unlearning? honoring that we can be having so many feelings at the same time that feel like they're in competition, welcoming them, honoring them. For those on the top of the coin, when it feels like guilt or shame, recognizing these are showing up to slow us down, to center our own feelings we need to get back to, swiftly shifting to responsibility, to accountable action, using those feelings of guilt and shame to tune in and get going. Okay. Next poll, please. The next sessions are on Feb 16 and March 16. I really hope that these next sessions in the webinar go deeper on anti-Blackness and how it operates. Talk a bit about our history. You can pick as many of these as you want. Help us understand critical race theory and why it matters for health. Gets into the physiological impacts of racism. Helps elucidate race-based medicine. Talks about lateral violence and especially helps us with solutions, moves us to action. Yes, okay, this is good because this is exactly what the next two webinars are about. And finally, one more poll for you. And I'm going to invite Ani and Omi Sheree to join me on the screen here as we see what comes in response to the final question. We just need to advance the poll. This is an open text box. This is for you to jot in what's a new insight you're sitting with, or what's something you're curious about? What's something that's been piqued for you that you don't understand as well? And now, like, ooh, I really need to learn more about X. I really need to, this feels muddy for me. I need to get clearer on it. And we don't need to perform anything here. This isn't about showing that we've got all the messages and that we're the best learner in the room. This is just about being authentic. This is about right now in this moment, one insight I'm sitting with is as follows, or something I'm curious about is as follows. Ani and Omi Sheree will have a look at this and think about lessons to take for shaping the next two webinars.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. As we come to a close, this is really going to inform the next two webinars. So the next one in February will be a focus more on anti-Black history here in Canada and how it manifests in our present day lives and in the clinical setting or healthcare setting. And then the third one will be on the physiology and more of the health impacts, the direct health impacts of racism with regards to health and healthcare. So, I think we're seeing a lot of comments on unlearning. And so that is the basis of the next two sessions as well. Now that you folks have the foundation or the early pieces around whiteness, around structures, understanding that these things are not personal, but require at a personal level that reflexive practice of really thinking about these systems and how we're complicit in them. And so the next few will do that. So I think where you're trying to, I'm seeing comments about learning about how to best be an ally, how to be part of dismantling systems and unlearning. We're certainly going to be covering those. I wonder if Omi Sheree has any reflections to share.
This was great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I always appreciate this workshop and the insights you provide and the way in which you prod people to, unlearn and to see things, and so useful. So I'm very excited about the next two. We're going to continue with some of the difficult knowledge, especially with, what does critical race theory have to do with medicine? One is liberal arts and the other is like the body and science. How are they connected? So we'll be having that conversation. And I see some of the curiosity here and the questions here around trying to make that connection. And, it is our hope that once we do that, people will have a better sense of what that means for their clinic, for their practice, for their patients, for themselves. So really looking forward to that. Again, our focus is on anti-Black racism in Black communities. And these are intersectional communities. These are diasporic and transnational communities. So when we understand the colonial foundational work of anti-Black racism, we will have a better understanding of what this means for Black queer people, Afro-Indigenous people, Black women, Black youth, Black folks living in poverty. Like we will be doing that intersectional work through this conversation of Blackness. So we're in addressing anti-Black racism and Black health. So I'm very excited by these questions and insights and thoughts, and looking forward to our next two conversations.
Yes, so with that, we're conscious of the time. It's 9:31, but we want to thank you so much for tuning in. Please hold on a couple more minutes because I think there's an announcement about an evaluation, but we want to thank you. We want to thank TASM leadership, and certainly we want to thank our executive director for the Black Health Education Collaborative, Sume, for helping us establish this. And so I'll turn it over to TASM leadership again, but thank you so much, Stephanie, for your phenomenal work as usual. Thanks, everyone.
It's my honor to thank the creators and the facilitators of the session, Dr. Nixon, Dr. Norum, and Dr. Dryden, for sharing your knowledge, your time, and your passion to the TASM community. It's only through your commitment to us as leaders can we advance our understanding, our responsibility, and importantly, our action to eradicate anti-Black racism in healthcare. For me, you have reoriented my thinking and feelings around systems of inequality. The COIN model offers such a relatable frame, and I have more thinking and more feedback to receive. I am, as you say, unsettled in a good way. Thank you to you, all the leaders present today who took an hour and a half to commit to this critical work as we collectively dismantle anti-Black racism in our organizations. We appreciate the time we are in and the importance you have placed on this event. The feedback survey is in the chat and you will receive an email with a link after the event. I look forward to seeing everybody in February in part 2 of our session. Thank you and have a great day.